think, act, and prosper. You are now tuned into the Money Level Show.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Money Level Show, where we think, act, and prosper. And today I have my friend coming back on here with me. You know, once you have somebody come on your show multiple times, you consider yourselves friends. You begin to have conversations outside of the investment arena and things like that off camera and everything. So I want to welcome back Justin Huhn. How you doing today?
Doing pretty well. Yeah. How about yourself? Glad to be back.
Man, I'm glad to be back, you know, just recovering from some health issues and things like that. But, you know, I'm just thankful to be alive and be on the show again and be able to talk money and investments and just thinking about the future and what's going to happen.
Right on, man. Glad you're doing all right.
Yeah, definitely. So uranium, we've been talking uranium for a while. I've heard some interesting things from Rick Rule. I remember the tweet you put out. You said Rick Rule was buying. I went and started buying. And so that was pretty fun. We saw that pullback. I believe I was watching Cameco. Cameco pulled back to about $19 or something like that, and I went and bought some more. But right now it seems like this bull run is in full effect. So we just got a few different things that we're gonna talk about, and in relation to that. So recently we had the news of the nuclear plant that was taken, I guess, hostage, or I don't know if you could take a nuclear plant hostage or what, but it was taken over by Russia. There was a lot of propaganda saying that they were risking blowing up all of Europe, blowing themselves up and everything. Then I hear it was a building, external building that was on fire. What was your take on that? And what was actually the sentiment around your subscribers, your audience, and just the fear? And is this the black swan for uranium? What was kind of going on there?
Well, I think the initial news, so this was Thursday evening of last week. So about a week ago today. The initial news had everybody pretty alarmed, obviously, because, until you can actually get facts on the ground, the headlines are always very alarmist, just generally speaking, the all capital letters, nuclear plant under attack from Russia and on fire currently. And so that's obviously a very concerning headline. What apparently happened, and we still don't know, because the Ukrainians are claiming that the Russians attacked the plant. The Russians are claiming that they were already in control of the plant, and there were Ukrainian saboteurs that were attacking the buildings around the plant. Essentially, we don't really know what's the truth, but the truth did start to trickle out in terms of the actual danger that the situation posed to the nuclear plants. But we actually had the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Ukraine tweet out that if the plant blows up, those were his words. If the plant blows up, it could be 10 times worse than Chernobyl. And in hindsight, I think it's probably likely that him, as well as the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, who made a similarly alarming tweet, probably were trying to garner some outside support potentially in a situation that is obviously complicated for them. So basically what we came to find out over the course of about 90 minutes to 2 hours was that it was basically an outbuilding, administrative building that had caught fire. There was never any damage to any of the reactors. All of the systems, all the safety systems are currently functioning normal and were at the time. It's a very large power plant. It's the largest in Europe. It's 5,700 5,800, I don't recall exactly, megawatts. It's huge. There's 6 reactors at this one site. 3 or 4 of them were already shut down due to they powered them down because of the surrounding fighting, essentially. Mm-hmm. One of them was in the process of being shut down that day. And then the 6th reactor was operating at reduced capacity to keep electricity there, to keep the cooling systems running. And so, and these plants have very, very robust containments, redundant safety systems. So it was just a very fear-inducing couple of hours with a lot of headlines being spun around by the mainstream media, obviously in social media, et cetera, But the situation was and is under control, so no real concern there. And it obviously just doesn't seem like a strategically logical thing for Russia or Ukrainian saboteurs to create some type of radiation event. Obviously, Russia, it's just right on the border from this plant, is very close to the Russian border. So radiation, if it gets released into the atmosphere, will just move around with the jet stream. So clearly, it's not a strategical move, and that's if they wanted to shell the actual plant and the reactor cores, they would shell the actual plant, and they didn't. But these, the containments on these things are built to withstand a 747 plowing into the side of them at full speed. And so these things are very robust. And thankfully, I don't think there were any fatalities and minor injuries during the skirmish. Supposedly, Russia is in control of the plant still currently, and there's the Ukrainian staff still there operating the plant. Everything is normal.
So the Ukrainian staff is still operating the plant there, but it's under control of Russia?
That's my understanding.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's very interesting. So what kind of so with Russia taking over a lot of these plants, are there any implications to like more shortages coming in regards to energy? Because it seems like they've taken offline a lot of the plants. I don't know how much like Ukraine, if they export nuclear to any other countries, or what kind of energy consequences or whatnot could potentially happen with this situation?
Well, I guess the potential is there for reduced electricity production, if that's something that Russia wanted to leverage. I don't know that they are going to do that or that it's been done yet, but it seems like maintaining control of the output of these power plants gives you a lot of leverage. I mean, cutting off the grid from the populace is a very terrible thing, honestly, to do to the people, and would create, I'm sure, a pretty substantial amount of chaos throughout the societies there. So I don't know if Ukraine exports nuclear. They might. Their nuclear, they have 15 reactors across 4 or 5 plants. I don't recall exactly. And it's about 50% of their grid. So they rely a lot on nuclear. But yeah, I mean, there's just a big mess in terms of energy kind of across the world right now. And that's just one that's particularly acute.
Yeah. This energy shortage is definitely just looking more and more concerning. I mean, I'm looking at some of the policies Joe Biden has been putting out, and a lot of these politicians, what they're advocating for. And it was interesting. I read this tweet by Doomberg, who said within 24 hours, Nancy Pelosi said stop importing like Russian energy, but then in the same 24 hours wasn't very accommodative of the United States producing more energy. So
which basically means that she went long oil futures.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So it's pretty wild just looking at all these things develop. So I was reading an article about Russia and Iran, and there was some type of nuclear deal or something that was supposed to go down between them two. Did you have your finger on what was happening there? I just saw one article on it.
I haven't been following it that closely, but there definitely is some speculation that the potential for sanctions against Russian uranium could have something to do with whether or not that joint pact between the U.S. and Iran around nuclear that they could be somehow connected. So we're kind of waiting for more news on both of those aspects.
Okay. Yeah. Because I saw they couldn't strike some type of agreement or something like that.
Right.
And it seems like Russia's in a corner in a lot of ways, but it seems like they still have a lot of leverage in a lot of ways. And I mean, to be honest, I think that Putin could do something very drastic, and very dangerous to the global economy with how much palladium they export, oil, energy, natural gas, wheat, fertilizer, all those different things. And like you see all these nations like ganging up on Russia, and it's like, hey, like you kind of playing with fire, I feel like.
Yeah, indeed. He has an immense amount of leverage simply by the amount of the percentage of their exports that are vital to both global economies, to food production, et cetera. Like you mentioned, fertilizer. Russia's the number one wheat exporter on the planet. Ukraine, I think, is the number five wheat exporter. There's a lot of speculation already, that there could be implications for food shortages. And Russia has a big market to the east that's not necessarily cutting them off at this point. China and India, they could be selling fertilizer, natural gas, uranium, enriched uranium to these markets as well. Even if they get sanctioned or they cut off exports to the west, they still have a pretty big market to the east. So he's got a lot of leverage here. That's for sure.
Do you think this is just part of like we're experiencing a global change in world order? That's kind of like how I've been looking at it. I mean, the United States has been the reserve currency since the 40s. And usually these cycles happen about every 80 to 100 years. And it feels like there's a lot of change that's going to happen in terms of who's the next superpower and all these different things. And I'm starting to think like, Russia and China, they aren't really backing down. They aren't like,
For sure.
So I've been kind of thinking that.
Yeah, it's hard to say. It's this kind of fourth turning situation. From I don't know if you've read that book, but it seems very similar to that thesis. I definitely tend to believe that the majority of the mainstream headlines that are being fed to the populace are probably not over the target in terms of what's really going on. I don't think this is a random occurrence that Putin just flipped a switch and snapped and all of a sudden just decided to invade, just because. It seems like there's energy being leveraged here. It seems like there's geopolitical tensions between NATO and Russia, NATO encroaching on Russia. This is not really my zone of expertise here, but it certainly seems like there's larger geopolitical shifts here than simply a skirmish between these bordering countries over whatever it is that they're skirmishing over Crimea. Although Crimea and the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine is pretty vital to Russia. Crimea has an immense amount of natural gas reserves and the warm water port, and that's pretty vital to Russia and also vital to Ukraine. So in some ways, Ukraine and Russia sort of fighting over that region. It's hard to say, but certainly things are really shaking up. Tomorrow, actually, we're recording on the 10th, so the 11th is the last day before Russia gets cut off from the SWIFT system for a number of their banks. And so that's just kind of like the global payment settlement system that's used by multiple countries around the world, and that gets cut off from Russia tomorrow. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of downstream effects that has. It definitely does seem like there's something bigger going on here. I agree with you.
Yeah, definitely. And does these sanctions impact any of the nuclear exports that Russia? I think we actually import some nuclear energy from Russia. What does this do with like some of the supply demand dynamics and all of that?
It's a pretty big deal, especially for the United States. It really would be a big deal if NATO or the EU gets roped into that, either the cutting off from Russia or the sanctioning by the US. Both have pretty substantial implications. So for the US specifically, Russia's exports of uranium, of all of the uranium products, is roughly about 16% of what the US imports. But with the enriched uranium, it's 20%. And that's actually limited by the Russian suspension agreement. So to limit that exposure to Russia, but still 20% of enriched uranium is huge. And Russia is a very large player in the enrichment realm. So they produce about 40% of the enriched uranium globally. And the reason that has such large implications is because the enrichment stage of the fuel cycle is kind of towards the end of the fuel cycle. After you have your enriched uranium, the next stage is to fabricate the fuel rods and then ship it to the plant. So you've already gone from the mining, the U308, and then the converting to the UF6, and then the enrichment. And so a lot of times what utilities will do, especially if they're short in the near term, if they're uncovered, I should say, with their needs for fuel in the near term, within a few years, they'll actually buy enriched uranium and kind of skip the first two steps of the fuel cycle. Instead of buying the U3O8 and then contracting for the conversion and then contracting for the EUP and then contracting for the fabricated fuel, they'll actually skip the first couple of steps, to pay up for it, but they can cut out, 12 months of that fuel cycle by going to enrichment. So if enrichment gets cut off, basically the implications for that are that the Western enrichers, so there's an enricher in the United States, there's enrichers in Europe, that they would have to do what's called overfeeding the centrifuges that actually enrich the converted uranium, the UF6. And so I'll try to put this as simply as possible. When the enrichers have excess capacity, so there's not a lot of demand, and these centrifuges are spinning at incredible speeds, it's a big deal kind of to shut them down. So they just take that excess capacity and they'll take their what they'll do is when you contract with the utility to produce enriched uranium, you contract at a certain tails assay. So that's the percentage of the waste material of the tails in terms of the U-235. And so essentially what it means is they're saying, okay, we will provide you this enriched uranium at this tails assay, which will kick out how much UF6 feedstock they need from the utility to put into the centrifuge to get the amount of EUP that they're contracting for. Okay. So when they have excess capacity, what they'll do is they'll spin down to a lower tails assay, effectively squeezing more enriched uranium out of the same amount of UF6 feed. And what that means is they're effectively putting less feed. They're underfeeding the centrifuges to get the contracted amount of EUP. They end up with excess UF6 and they can sell that into the spot market. All right, so that's underfeeding. That's a big source of secondary supply in the uranium market.
So is that kind of like, how they how now you have food companies, they kind of dumb down the food so that they can make more product to sell and make more money, pretty much.
Yeah, in some ways. I mean, with this, it's particular to a reduced amount of demand for enrichment. So when demand for enrichment increases, they have to utilize all of their capacity in order to produce the enriched uranium that is being contracted for through that increased demand. But when there's not a lot of demand, they can contract at this certain tails assay, and then they can spin that material down to a much lower tails assay, meaning they need less feed. It's like if you're going to produce a quart of orange juice, and typically if you're pressing it with a certain amount of pressure, you need X amount of oranges to create that quart of orange juice. But if not a lot of people are buying orange juice, you don't need to produce it very fast. You can squeeze the heck out of the oranges, get every last drop out of those things, and you'll need less oranges on the front end to get that quart of orange juice. So that's underfeeding.
Yeah.
What we're talking about now is the opposite. If Russia is effectively cut off from the enrichment stage to the West, the Western enrichers will have to overfeed. They'll have to get the material in and out faster. So they'll have to put more feedstock into the centrifuges and spin it to a higher tails assay. So the actual waste material will essentially be richer because they're not squeezing it as hard to get the end material out. So that overfeeding will essentially result in an increased demand on UF6, which has knock-on effects for U3O8. So it just tightens the whole market in the front end.
Yeah. That sounds like a super complicated. You got me ready to join Rick Rule's boot camp or something. I've been thinking about it. I was like, okay, it's on the weekend, I might do it. So that's very interesting, and just like hearing how that process works. Does that process affect any of like the quality of any type of output for like the average consumer, or does it mostly have effects on the market?
For the average consumer, just
like,
consumer of electricity?
Consumer of electricity.
Well, sure. I mean, the rising costs throughout the fuel cycle in certain markets and deregulated markets, those costs are, passed on to the consumer. So those increased fuel costs definitely can increase the cost of energy production, and that will in certain markets get passed on to the energy consumer, to people that are paying their power bills to that utility.
Yep. So it's almost like shrinkflation in a way.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So what's up with the Japanese restarts? I've been hearing some news about Japan restarting their nuclear reactors and how bullish this is, along with Sprott buying the physical uranium on the market. So what's that looking like for the uranium market? And is this what we've been waiting for? Like, oh yeah, now the bull run is starting. Well, it's already started, but
Yeah. This is what Rick's been waiting for. He's been waiting for the Japanese restarts for a lot of years, and he's very patient. They are continuing to be restarted. It's not happening at breakneck speed. I think that there's 10 or maybe 11 reactors back online from, what were operating before Fukushima was 53 or 54. So it's happening slowly, but the pace of getting the approvals for restarts seems to be increasing. The sentiment around restarting seems to be improving. And with Japan in particular, it's such a perfect use case for them to restart these things because of the shutdowns, they've had to rely increasingly on natural gas and coal. And both of those commodities have gone on huge price runs as well. So the Japanese are feeling it in terms of the cost of energy. And there's a lot of utilities in Japan that are still sitting on a decent amount of inventory. So they could restart these plants in some cases and not have to buy a lot of uranium. Some of the utilities, of course, do not have as much inventory or any at all and would have to come back into the market. So it's just another, bullish element to the overall thesis of Japanese restarts for sure. And it does seem to be happening slightly faster than before because they seem to be not only getting more serious about their climate goals. I think that they're wanting to be, by 2035, they were shooting to have, I think it was 25% of the grid nuclear, which would have required another about another 20 nuclear plants, reactors to come online in Japan in the next 10 to 15 years.
Okay. And I know China's been, advocating and getting some of their plants online and stuff as well. So it seems like the sentiment is increasing around the world.
Indeed, yeah. And just yesterday, the new president that was elected in South Korea was and is the most adamant about restarting their nuclear power plants and even building new plants. The president that got ousted, basically just was all about shutting down their nuclear plants and phasing them out over a number of years. And he could actually feel the shifting sentiment amongst the populace. And towards the end, when he was running for re-election, he reversed course and he started to say, "Oh no, we can keep these last ones online and maybe we can build some new ones." But all of the candidates that were running were pro-nuclear. But the guy that actually won, and the new president of South Korea, is very, very, very supportive of nuclear energy. So that's a good thing. They used to be a significant player in the space, so that's very positive.
And I heard that France is up in the ante a little bit. Are they building some new reactors or something?
France wants to build, what was it? I think it was another 6 EPR reactors. These are 1,650 megawatt reactors. These are big boys. They want to build 6 more of those by 2035. They have some older reactors that could be shut down, but they're much smaller. They're 800 or 900 megawatts. But France is actually they're the largest exporter of electricity on the planet, the number one country for electricity exports. And so they're all about nuclear. It's been an absolute boon for the country. They have a number of units that are running at reduced capacity or offline currently due to some maintenance issues. So their actual demand for those reactors this year is going to be down from normal. But long term, it's looking like they're very positive on nuclear for sure.
Mm-hmm. And what's up with Germany? It seemed like they were starting to look at it, and then they pulled back again. And I'm just like, what kind of dysfunction is going on over there?
It does seem to be pretty dysfunctional. I can't tell you; it changes day to day. They shut down 3 of their last 6 reactors on New Year's Eve, and then they've got 3 more running currently that are aimed to be closed by the end of the year. And obviously, they're in a very serious energy crisis currently, with high reliance on Russian natural gas. With the Nord Stream 2 pipeline getting postponed, at least the approval for that was cut off. So they're in a tight spot, and there's definitely increasing pressure on them to keep the 3 remaining reactors that are running currently online longer. And it sounds like the decommissioning of the 3 that they shut down in December has not yet begun. So technically those could be restarted. And we hear just day over day it changes. So, last week they were saying Germany considering restarting the 3 that they shut down, or keeping the 3 online. I think it was keeping the 3 online. And then just 2 days later, it says Germany declines this consideration and is planning to continue the phase out. So I'm not holding my breath with Germany, but I think it's, at the very least, it's obvious kind of what's happening there, and they're on the world stage currently, especially with the pipelines from Russia being under scrutiny.
Yeah. It sounds like they're backed into the corner too, and we saw that United States and I believe Canada United States and the UK have like banned imports from Russia, but then you have these other countries over in Europe, they're not doing that. And so it sounds like Germany wants to be dependent on other countries at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. I think this whole situation is definitely shaking things up for European countries, especially those that are heavily reliant on Russia. And a lot of the countries in Europe are reliant on Russia for far more than just gas, for wheat, for fertilizer. I was reading something the other day that Russia is a big exporter of neon, which is used in semiconductor manufacturing. Like something like they export 90% of the world's neon or something like that. I'd never even heard of it. So, they're a vital source of raw materials. And yeah, it's interesting times for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you kind of you're into the gold miners as well. I don't know if you're still in them, but I know you were before. What's your take on what gold is doing? Obviously, it's kind of reacting to these geopolitical things, but it seems like it was going up. It was increasing in value before then, before the whole the invasion and everything. But what are you looking at in terms of gold?
Yeah, I hold a few gold and silver miners. I have a few options trades on silver. I'm bullish on it. I think it's one of those that's easier for me to just kind of hold and ignore. I don't really trade around that much besides the options plays. Yeah, it does seem like there's been quite a pop based on kind of the war trade, which is common for whenever you see conflict like this. You'll see gold and silver respond, but I think silver especially is underperformed. Gold, the price of gold has held up relatively well, all things considered, but the miners are really what have sold off a lot over the past year, 16, 18 months. So I think it'll have its run. I think its time is coming. I don't know about timing.
Yeah.
So I don't speculate on that. It's just something that I like to own. I think they'll have a good run this year, let's say. I'm pretty confident in that. I have enough allocated to that I'll be happy if it does. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And then we talked a little bit about the food, potential food shortages and everything. Have you been keeping up with that? I've been educating the audience and hey, make sure we're paying attention, stock up a little bit. I know Lynn Alden had put in her recent newsletter, just encouraging people to kind of, hedge yourself against these geopolitical risks and everything, which was something that I've never seen her do in her final thought of her newsletters. And so how you been keeping up with that?
For sure. Less on the investing side and more of just the security side. I would say that I missed a good run in fertilizers, but they could go a lot higher. I didn't trade wheat. There's a number of agricultural commodities that probably could be traded, but no, I've got 2 chest freezers that are loaded up. I've got water stored. I'm planting a garden pretty extensively right now. So I just, I try to shore up that front. I don't know how vast or widespread or far-reaching food shortages will be, but even if it's just, vastly increased cost for food, I'd rather just, stock up on the things that we eat commonly and that can be stored for, a year or two in the freezer. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. But there's probably obviously a number of, investment opportunities around it. But, with that kind of thing, first and foremost, I just want to make sure that I've got at least a few months of food stored for myself and my family, and then from there, then I can think about the other elements of it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's what I've been encouraging the audience. I actually sent out a mass text to like some of my friends and family, just because the mainstream media don't tell us this stuff, and it's always too late every time they come to speak about it, and
you want to be ahead of the curve with that kind of thing, because when it does go to the mainstream media, or when people actually start to notice the shelves kind of going bare a little bit, then it gets kind of panic mode. You don't want to be in that position. And you just kind of anecdotally on this subject, I have a friend who has a farming family in the Midwest, and he was saying that fertilizer costs this year versus last year were 3 or 4 times, to the point where he was considering not farming and actually just doing contract tractor work. So I don't know. I mean, that's just, like I said, anecdotally from one source. But if that sort of thing is, if a certain percentage of farmers just say these inputs are too high, I'm not going to farm, that's another knock-on effect of just high fertilizer prices. So yeah.
Interesting. I mean, and even the stocks. I mean, I was in NTR Nutrien, and I've been in there for a while, and it's already then doubled over the last year.
Yeah, that one's gone on a good run, and for sure.
Yeah, it's a few others too out there.
Yeah.
So just to end us on a uranium note, I had a question just around how. So when you're positioning yourself in these stocks, do you ever are you just buying and holding, or do you take profits and allocate them to other areas, other cheap areas, cheap commodities, or do you just are you just holding for like that however much price per pound uranium?
We don't really have a price per pound target. For the newsletter specifically, we do trade in and out of stocks, not super frequently. Generally speaking, we hold through most of the volatility, but we do have positions. Oftentimes when we're trading out of a company, it's for fundamental reasons, not for technical reasons. So if a company, the last company that we traded out of was kind of a drill play. They had some very intelligently structured joint ventures that didn't pan out. So we sold that. And then we put that money into a call option spread that we still have on, that we're up about 40% on, with the underlying up about 15%. So that's kind of nice. And then the other position that we put it into is up pretty substantially. So most of the time we will trade out of companies, like I said, for fundamental reasons. And then we do options trades. And those have expirations. So we'll either trade out of those on spikes, or if it's a call spread, most of the time we actually let those expire and just, dump the cash into the account. And so, but we will in the future be more active in terms of trimming and going into cash positions on euphoric runs, because we're not at the very beginning of this run. I don't think we're close to the end, but obviously we see euphoric spikes and pullbacks, every year, even in a bull market. So
yeah, definitely. And even along that note, are you planning to get a uranium Lamborghini? People with the Bitcoin, they were buying Lambos and stuff. I'm just wondering if Justin's going to be ready for that Lambo off the uranium.
Oh, not my style. No. I think I'm all about buying land and buying just like physical assets. I guess a Lamborghini is kind of a collector's item that's probably an appreciating asset, to be honest. But yeah, no, I want to buy some land. I want to build a house with my own hands. Like that's where my profits are going to go.
Nice. Yeah, that's good skill to have. Where are some places you're looking at for land?
I think really it depends on how things go. I would say in the next few years, politically speaking, for the most part, I would prefer to be in a place where I have more freedoms, not only with the building code, I'm in Southern California currently. I'm literally in the county with the strictest building codes in the country. So it's very difficult to do what you want to do here. So we're probably looking at somewhere outside of this county at least. There's some areas in the southwest of the United States that we really like. And then, my wife is from Argentina, so who knows how things look in the next few years there. Maybe we could relocate to that area, Uruguay, Argentina, potentially. My wife loves Ibiza, obviously a very expensive place to live and build, but who knows? We'll see.
Yeah. I've been, most of my families, they've been migrating to Arizona. So I thought about buying an acre out there. I'm like, oh, you can buy a desert acre for about $1,500. I was like, what can I do with it?
I like Arizona. There's a huge area of Arizona in the Northwest where I absolutely love, but there's no water there. It's like zero groundwater, or it's extremely, extremely deep to the point of you can't really drill wells. So you got to figure out the water situation, the rain catchment or something if you're going to buy land and do a little homestead out there. But I like Arizona. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Justin, appreciate you coming on to the show again and speaking to the audience. Could you talk some more about Uranium Insider, just so we can plug the audience there?
For sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me again. Uranium Insider is a newsletter, investing newsletter that we've been doing for almost 3 years, about 2.5 years now. I've got a small dedicated team behind me. Our inception to date returns are pushing 500% here since August of 2019. And we issue a monthly newsletter that's super in depth. That's every month, at the beginning of the month. And then obviously we have intra-month, email bulletins that go out when there's market moving information. We sent a bulletin out last week after the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant scare. Within a few hours of that happening, once we fully understood the situation, we sent an email out to our members, kind of giving them our take on the situation, which we got a lot of praise for. And we have members only webinars that we do once a month. Also, we typically have a CEO from one of the companies that we own come and join us. And that will be the case this month as well, which is happening next week. And it's been a great experience so far. We have a really awesome community, and I'm looking forward to the next few years for this thing.
Yeah, definitely. So be sure to go check out the uraniuminsider.com. Also follow Justin on Twitter at Uranium Insider. And appreciate you coming back on.
My pleasure, Daryl. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right.